They train you for the bomb under the car, the sniper on the ridge, which the man with bad intentions and a worse coat who lingers 3 seconds too long outside the iron gate. Nobody trains you for the woman with the handbag. Nobody thinks to. TBH, she's the queen consort. She smells of Chanel No. 5 for what it's worth, and English roses, and 30 years of knowing exactly where to stand in every photograph. Her shoes have never touched wet grass. Her smile has been engineered, over decades, into something that looks precisely like warmth. And inside her bag, tucked beneath a silk handkerchief monogrammed with the wrong initials, was a device so small it could have been a breath mint. It wasn't a breath mint. I've stood post outside rooms where the fate of governments gets decided over lukewarm tea and bad biscuits. I've logged 12 TBH, 141 incident reports in 6 years, and filed exactly none that mattered. I know the weight of a secret by the way men carry their shoulders when they're holding one. That Tuesday, every shoulder in Windsor was up around someone's ears. What followed, the halted meeting, the prince's face going the particular shade of white that doesn't come from cold, the quiet, controlled chaos of men who are paid to be calm, absolutely losing their composure in extremely polite, extremely British ways. I logged all of it. Every word. And because someone has to remember what actually happened in that room, it wasn't me who found the device. It was Sergeant Declan Marsh, and that's where this story starts. The morning started the way all dangerous mornings do, quietly and smelling of floor wax. I'm Lieutenant Callum Graves, Intelligence Liaison, Household Division, which is the official way of saying I follow important people around with a clipboard and write down everything that seems wrong. The unofficial way of saying it's, I'm the man nobody listens to until something catastrophic happens, at which point everyone asks why I didn't. Speak louder. I've been speaking at exactly the same volume for 6 years. Windsor Great Hall on a Tuesday in November has a particular quality of light, gray and institutional, like the inside of a very expensive filing cabinet. The heating is always 2 degrees too cold in the corridors, and 2 degrees too warm in the reception rooms, which means every guard on duty spends his shift in a quiet, private battle with his own body temperature. You learn to ignore it. You learn to ignore most things in this building. That's the job, honestly. That's the whole architecture of the job. Sergeant Declan Marsh had been on the morning rotation for 11 days running. I'd noticed him the way I notice everything, through the lens of the incident log, which I carry on a battered A5 notepad, because the digital system crashes twice a week, and I stopped trusting it in my 3rd year. Marsh was 31, household cavalry, seconded to close protection detail for the current diplomatic engagement cycle. 6'2", combat veteran, the kind of man who stands so still during ceremonial duty that tourists photograph him thinking he's decorative and then flinch when he blinks. He had a tell, though. One tell. When something bothered him, so he touched the left cuff of his tunic, just a brush, 2 fingers. Plus, nothing anyone would clock unless they were logging behavioral micro-patterns as a personal hobby. I'd logged it 17 times in 11 days. The meeting scheduled for that Tuesday was, on paper, a standard diplomatic briefing. Representatives from 3 Commonwealth nations, senior advisors, 1 junior foreign office minister who looked permanently on the verge of apologizing for something, and Prince William, who had cleared his schedule for 2 hours and whose schedule clearing was, according to my liaison brief, being treated with the kind of logistical gravity usually reserved for nuclear asset transfer. It mattered. Whatever was being discussed in that room, it mattered in the specific way that things which never make the news always matter more than the things that do. I was stationed at the corridor junction outside the Crimson Drawing Room, which puts me 40 feet from the main entrance. Gives me sight lines to both the east staircase and the secondary access point near the old servants' passage. Nobody uses the servants' passage anymore. I logged it as a vulnerability in 2021. The actual report is in a filing cabinet somewhere, I assume, aging gracefully. The Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla, Queen Consort, I still catch myself with the old title, arrived at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, which was, sort of, if you knew her schedule patterns, unusual enough that I made a note before I'd consciously decided to. She moved the way she always moved, with the absolute composure of a woman who has been observed so relentlessly for so long that being watched has simply become the texture of her existence. Lady-in-waiting flanking left, which private secretary half a step behind. Right. The handbag, cream leather, structured. The kind of bag that costs more than my monthly housing allowance, held in the crook of her left arm with the practiced ease of a woman who has never in her adult life set a bag on the floor. Marsh was on the door. I watched him clock her arrival from across the corridor. Standard protocol. Visual sweep. Credentials confirmed by the lead protection officer. Guests of this level don't go through secondary screening unless flagged. She wasn't flagged. She was the Queen Consort. She was 13 minutes early, and she was smiling at the Junior Foreign Office. Minister the way you smile at a child who's done something slightly incorrect, but charmingly. Marsh touched his left cuff, and I wrote it down. I almost didn't think anything of it. That's like the lie I tell myself now. Almost. The truth is, I wrote it down, and then stood there staring at the word on the page for 4 seconds, longer than I should have, which in my world is the equivalent of a flashing red light and a klaxon. He'd touched the cuff when she walked through the door. Not when she walked down the corridor. Not when her, for what it's worth, private secretary fumbled with his lanyard. When she walked through the door and the handbag cleared the threshold sensor, the passive one, the one that's technically decommissioned, the one I'd flagged as still showing marginal signal readings in a report that's, presumably, in the same filing cabinet as the servant's passage report. I looked at Marsh, plus he, TBH, was looking at the handbag. Not at her, not at the room. The bag. The meeting was due to begin in 11 minutes. The prince was already inside. The Commonwealth representatives were inside. The thing that was being discussed, whatever shape it actually had, whatever weight it carried in the rooms where real decisions get made, was already in motion. Marsh hadn't moved from the door. Not 2 of the protection officers had rotated inside. Standard configuration, which the door was closed. The room was sealed. And I was standing 40 feet away watching a man who doesn't show tells touch his cuff for the 18th time in 11 days and decide, with the calm certainty of someone choosing between 2 bad options on a battlefield, not to let it go. He crossed the corridor, and he crossed it in the particular way that trained protection officers cross spaces when they don't want to appear to be doing what they're doing. Measured pace, neutral expression, eyes moving in a pattern that looks like boredom from 20 feet and reads as threat, assessment from 2. He passed me without acknowledgement, which meant he knew I was watching and had decided I didn't require managing. I fell into step behind him. He didn't pretty much break stride. "Graves," he said. "Marsh, you're going to want to call this in before I do what I'm about to do." I'd my radio out before the sentence finished. The handbag was sitting on the side table in the antechamber, left there by the lady-in-waiting, while Camilla was escorted inside. Standard practice. The antechamber was empty. The side table was 6 feet from the closed door of the crimson drawing room, where 11 people and whatever they were deciding were sealed inside together, and Marsh crouched beside the bag, didn't touch it. Looked at it the way you look at something that has already told you what it's, and you're just waiting for yourself to catch up. The passive sensor, he said. It's been decommissioned. It's been administratively decommissioned. He looked up at me. Something in his face was absolutely still in a way that wasn't calm. It still runs. I checked the output logs last Thursday. I stared at him. Why, I guess. Were you checking decommissioned sensor logs? He touched his cuff. Because something about the last 11 days felt wrong, he said. And honestly, I couldn't log what I couldn't name. Outside the tall windows, the November light was doing its gray, institutional best. Somewhere in the crimson drawing room, someone was about to make a decision that would matter in ways that never make the news. I keyed my radio. Plus, my voice came out steadier than I'd any right to. There's a protocol for this. Of course there's a protocol for this. There's a protocol for everything inside these walls. Laminated, indexed, reviewed annually. Signed by 17 people who have never been in the situation the protocol describes. I know the protocol for a credible explosive threat, a suspected listening device, a medical emergency involving a principal, an unauthorized recording in a secure meeting, and, my personal favorite, a protocol for the protocol review process itself, which requires a committee and takes 8 months and produces a document that immediately becomes outdated. I keyed the radio and said the 6 words that start the chain. Then I stood in the antechamber with Marsh and the bag, and 11 seconds of absolute silence in which I could hear the heating system, the faint murmur of. Formal conversation through 2 inches of historic door, and the particular sound my own pulse makes when my body has correctly identified that my career is standing on a trapdoor. Marsh was still crouched beside the bag and not touching it, looking at it with the focus of a man solving a problem by refusing to look away. "How certain are you?" I said. "Sensor pinged twice when she cleared the threshold. Like audio frequency emission signature. Pretty much. Not strong. Not nothing. That sensor's been flagging false positives for 3 years. I know." He looked at me. "That's why nobody fixed it." I wrote that down. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, and/or evidence. Or just, well, the need to have something to do with my hands, while the logical conclusion of the next few minutes assembled itself in my head like furniture you didn't want delivered. Because, here's the thing about what Marsh was saying. Joy, if he was right. The device, if it was a device, wasn't a bomb. The emission signature he was describing meant audio. You know, a recording instrument. Small, passive or semi-passive, activated by proximity to specific frequencies, possibly voice-keyed, possibly on a timer. The kind of thing that doesn't kill anyone. The kind of, thing that's, in many ways, more dangerous than the kind that does. Someone wanted to know what was said in that room, and someone had put a thing in Camilla's bag to hear it. The question, the one I didn't write down because some questions are too loud for paper, was whether Camilla knew. The secondary question, the one currently doing something unpleasant to my stomach, was that the diplomatic meeting inside that room had been on the schedule for 6 weeks, which meant whoever put the device in the bag had known about the meeting for at least that long, which meant they had either access to the schedule or access to someone who had access to the schedule, which is a very small list of people and a very large category of disaster. The door to the crimson drawing room opened, not the main door, and the secondary access, the one set into the wall paneling, originally built for footmen in an era when the movement of servants through a room was meant to be invisible. It's still on the schematic. It's flagged as disused, and twice. The man who came through it was one of the protection officers who'd rotated inside. Officer Henley, 45, Career Household Division. He'd been on William's detail for 4 years, long enough that his face had taken on a quality of mild, permanent vigilance that I imagine he wore even in his sleep. He registered me and Marsh and the bag in approximately 1 second and didn't change expression. "Graves," he said, "tell me we're not doing what this looks like." Marsh flagged a passive sensor reading. Henley looked at the bag. His jaw moved very slightly, like a man chewing the inside of his cheek to stop himself saying the first thing that came to mind. "The meeting," he said, "still running. 7 minutes into the briefing. William, inside." He looked at me, then at Marsh, who had finally stood up, slowly, deliberately, with the particular physical patience of a man who has learned that moving carefully is the difference between a situation and an incident. Henley ran a palm across the back of his neck. "If we pulled a pin on this," Henley said, "and it's a false positive. I know. It's her bag, Graves. It's her... The optics of interrupting a... I know what the optics are. You'll be lucky to transfer to bloody Balmoral Gate duty." Marsh said nothing. He just looked at Henley with the expression of a man who has been in worse situations than this one. Found that most of them resolved faster when people stopped tallying the personal cost and started doing the thing. Henley looked at the bag for a long moment. Then he opened the door to the crimson drawing room. I've to be fair, been in that room 3 times in 6 years, always on the periphery, always logging. It's smaller than photographs suggest. Low-ceilinged, rich with the particular smell of old wood and cold flowers and documents that have been handled by important people for so long they've started to smell important themselves. The sort of Axminster carpet absorbs sound. I guess, windows face north and keep the light flat and non-committal. William was at the head of the conference table. He looked up when Henley came in, registered the controlled urgency on Henley's face, which, to anyone without a reference baseline, had looked like nothing at all. To William, who had been reading that face for 4 years, it apparently read clearly. He stood, which, "If you'll excuse me 1 moment," he said to the room, in a tone so even it could have been filed under routine, and came to the door. He looked, I guess, at me first, then at Marsh, then at the bag on the side table. Nobody had said a word. He looked back at the bag for 3 seconds. "Is anyone hurt?" he said. "No, sir." "Is the room compromised?" Marsh said. "We believe the device is contained in the antechamber. Meeting room should be clean." William's face did the thing I'd been told about, never witnessed, the thing that's invisible in photographs. It isn't in any briefing document, isn't logable in any conventional sense. A very brief, very complete reorganization of everything behind his eyes. Math of a man who understands what's being implied, who it implicates, and what happens next, and who arrives at the answer and carries it, without flinching. "The meeting continues," he said. "Not a question. Plus, sir," Henley said, "the protocol under a suspected device situation is..." "The meeting continues." He looked at me. "Log it as a technical malfunction and contain the device. Nobody in that room learns what's happening until I know what happened." He went back inside. The door closed, and Marsh and I stood in the antechamber. And the bag sat on the side table. Plus, from inside the room, muffled through 2 inches of historic wood, someone laughed politely at something. I wrote down the time. The technical team arrived 11 minutes later, responding to my radio call with the quiet, accelerated efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this and hoped they'd never need to. They were in civilian clothes, maintenance contractors, on paper. They swept the antechamber in 4 minutes with equipment that looked like it belonged in a university laboratory and cost more than the building it was operating in. The device was there, which the size of a coat button, threaded through the lining seam of the bag's inner pocket, where it would register as a structural, pretty much, anomaly only if you were looking for it in particular with the right instrument. Audio activated, already running, already recording. How long it had been running, the technician said, looking at me with the careful neutrality of someone delivering news to a superior they don't envy, was going to require lab analysis. Marsh stood by the window. The November light didn't think useful for anyone. I looked at the bag, cream leather, structured, initialed in gold on the outer clasp, and thought about the word that nobody in this antechamber had said yet. The word that turns a security breach into a constitutional problem. The sort of word that has implications reaching back through years and forward through consequences that don't have names yet. Marsh touched his cuff. Once. Then he went back to the door and stood post, like nothing had happened. Because that's what the post requires. Because that's what the job is. Because in the hours after a discovery that could unpick the seams of something very large and very old, someone has to keep standing in the corridor looking like the world is ordinary. So he was very good at that. I logged it. The meeting ended at 11:14 a.m. The participants filed out in the ordered, untroubled way of people who believed they had spent 2 hours in a confidential briefing and were now confidentially briefed, proceeding with their afternoons. The Junior Foreign Office minister had a small crumb on his lapel that nobody told him about. The Commonwealth representatives shook hands with the correct amount of warmth and the correct amount of restraint. William thanked them in the corridor outside the Crimson Drawing Room, with his hand slightly clasped behind his back, which is, according to 3 separate behavioral profiles in my reference archive, what he does when he's managing something significant behind his sternum. Camilla left through the east staircase at 11:19. She didn't collect her bag. She didn't ask about her bag. I logged it in the margin, in smaller handwriting than usual, as though making it physically smaller might reduce what it implied. The lady in waiting also left without the bag, which might mean nothing, might mean she was told to, might mean the bag had been quietly flagged to her by someone in the chain between Henley's radio transmission and Camilla's departure, and the decision had been made above my pay grade to let the morning proceed, as though the antechamber held only air and old carpet. I am not paid to speculate, which I speculate constantly. The technical kind of team had sealed the device in an evidence casing and removed it by 10:43. The bag remained on the side table, swept, documented, now clean in the sense that it contained full thing operational, but in no other sense clean at all. At 11:22, someone from the private office collected it without fanfare and without signing anything on my clipboard, which I pointed out. And they looked at me the way people in private offices look at men with clipboards when they want you to understand that the clipboard has ceased to be the relevant instrument. I signed it myself. Date, time, description, transfer to unnamed private office staff. Look, let the record show. Plus, Marsh came off post at noon, and I found him in the small staff room on the lower corridor, the one with the kettle that takes 9 minutes to boil, and the single mug that everyone uses because someone once took the others home and nobody followed up. He was standing at the window with a paper cup of something. That wasn't tea, watching the gravel drive where the last of the diplomatic vehicles were pulling out through the gate. You should have been at the debrief, I said. Was I invited to the debrief? No. Then I wasn't at the debrief. He drank whatever was in the cup. His face was doing the version of nothing that people do when something is using up a significant amount of their internal processing, and they can't afford to show it on the outside. I sat on the edge of the table. The table was cold. The heating in this room was doing the corridor thing. 2 degrees under. I'd logged it twice. Presumably it was in the filing cabinet. They're going to TBH. Want a full account from you, I said. I know. The decommissioned sensor. Why you were checking it. What you thought you'd find. I didn't think I'd find anything specific, Marsh said. I thought something was wrong, and I went looking in the place where things being wrong might show up. That's not a satisfying answer for a formal inquiry. No, he agreed. It's not. I looked at my notepad, which 1,253 entries now. I'd numbered them from the first day as a personal discipline, a way of measuring whether the work accumulated into anything, whether the logging was labor or just motion. Most entries were nothing. Protocol compliance, shift changes, equipment checks, the furniture of a job that mostly exists to prevent the things that occasionally and catastrophically happen. Entry 1253, 1119. CQC departs east staircase. Does not retrieve personal bag from antechamber. On no query made. I looked at it, which the question that I'd not write in the log, that Marsh had not said in the debrief he hadn't attended, that I'd watched Henley decide not to raise with William when William went back through the crimson drawing room door. That question had a specific shape, a specific weight. Plus, it sat in the room the way the device had sat in the bag. Small and quiet and already running. Because the device had been audio activated, which and the person carrying the bag had spent 30 minutes in this building before the meeting, including 2 in the private gallery on the upper floor, where the ventilation carries sound from the eastern conference rooms in a way that's been on the facilities review since 2019, where she had spoken to 3 members of staff individually, where her voice, specific, distinctive, on the voice of a woman whose vocal patterns are among the most documented in the country, would have met the activation threshold. The device had been running before she entered the meeting, which meant whatever was captured on it began before anyone in that room said anything that mattered, which meant whoever placed the device either didn't know that and had calibrated it incorrectly, or they had calibrated it perfectly. And to be fair, the meeting was never what they were listening to. Marsh set his paper cup on the windowsill. The inquiry board, he said. They'll conclude it, was an external actor, someone who'd accessed the schedule. They'll trace the bag to the last 3 events she carried it to, look for contact windows, identify a credible opportunity. They'll build a clean narrative. Probably, I said. And you'll log it. I'll log what I observed. He turned from the window and looked at me with the expression of a man deciding how much to hand to someone else to carry. It was a particular expression. I'd seen it on soldiers after engagements, on officers after incidents, on people who had done the right thing in a crisis and were now arriving at the part where doing the right thing stopped being sufficient. Graves, he said. The passive sensor. Yes. The one I checked Thursday climbed the, output logs. What about them? Someone had already queried them. He held my gaze. Wednesday. Full read of the week's output. Same access tier as mine. The look. Query was logged under a maintenance flag. The kettle finished boiling. Neither of us moved toward it. You're saying someone else knew the sensor was still live, I said. I'm saying someone else checked whether the sensor was still live, the day before I did. I wrote down the time. 12:09 p.m., the force of habit. The physical anchor of the pen on the page when everything else has the quality of a floor that might not hold. That goes in the formal report, I said. Does it? It wasn't a question. It was a door being held open, and a man waiting to see if I'd walk through it or stand in, the corridor, and log that the door existed. I thought about the filing cabinet, the servant's passage report, the sensor report, the facility review. Every piece of paper I'd produced in 6 years that had traveled into institutional darkness and made no observable difference to anything. Marsh picked up, his cap from the table. Off post until 1400, he said. And if anyone needs my location, I'm in the lower staff room. He walked out. I sat on the cold table in the 2 degrees underroom and looked at entry 1253 and the blank line beneath it, which was 1254, which was whatever I decided came next. Outside, through the window, the gravel drive was empty. The diplomatic vehicles were gone. Look, the gate was closed. The building had resumed its posture of absolute, ancient, impeccable ordinary. Somewhere in a lab, a technician was pulling audio from a button-sized device. I don't know what they found. I know what I wrote down, and I know it's not the same thing. I uncapped my pen